So welcome to the Anatomy and Physiology lesson on blood circulation. When we talk about blood, we want to be thinking about what function and what responsibilities our blood circulation has within the body. And the main thing you want to think about is transport. So blood is moving around the body and it's transporting substances. When we talk about circulations, there are two circulations in the body. Today we're going to talk about blood circulation, which is a two-way circulation. Don't worry about that sheet at the moment. I'm just sort of briefing the subject. And then next lesson, we'll talk about lymphatic circulation, which is another circulation that runs alongside the blood circulation, but it is just a one-way circulation. So the way to differentiate them is blood circulation is two-way, and lymphatic circulation is one way. So let's have a look at the sheet where we're filling in the gaps. This is a really good method of revising. It's got all the key information on it. So we'll start. Blood is a two-way system. So your first gap is the number 2. Transporting O2 or oxygen to the cells and CO2 or carbon dioxide away from the cells. So blood is a two-way system transporting oxygen or O2 to the cells and carbon dioxide or CO2 away from the cells. So instantly we can see that our respiratory system, so our breathing, is very closely linked to our circulatory system, our blood circulation. Because in order for that oxygen and carbon dioxide to be exchanged, we need the use of the lungs. That's the way that we're going to get those gases into the body and then back out of the body. So the circulation between the lungs and the heart is called pulmonary circulation. Pulmonary circulation. So the blood goes from the lungs to the heart and then from the heart to the lungs, and we refer to that as a specific type of circulation called pulmonary. So at the centre of the blood circulation is the heart. So our next paragraph starts with the heart is at the centre of blood circulation. And it's responsible for pumping blood around the body. So when we looked at different types of tissue, we looked at muscular tissue, and we found that there were 3 types of the muscular tissue, and one of those was cardiac. So the muscles that control the heart are involuntary, so they're not under conscious control, and they're responsible for the pumping action of the heart. So moving on to the next sentence, the left side of the heart deals with O2 or oxygen. So the left side of the heart deals with oxygen, whilst the right side deals with carbon dioxide. So if we suddenly just had a look at that heart, we can see that our left side, so this heart is in your body, it's not looking at you, it's in your body. So our left side, we've got some vessels here that are going to bring oxygenated blood. So we'd probably work out that that blood's coming from the lungs because we've breathed that oxygen in. So that blood is coming into the heart with oxygen in it from the lungs. The heart's going to contract, and that's going to push all the blood out of these vessels here. We'll come back to this, don't worry, it's just an overview. To the rest of the body, send all that oxygen out to all the cells, skin cells, hair cells, muscle cells, bone cells, your liver, your kidneys, etc., etc. And then we've got these two vessels on the right side. Remember, the right side deals with deoxygenated blood, or the carbon dioxide that's in the blood. So that comes all the way back from the body. It's had its oxygen, thank you very much. Here's the carbon dioxide back again. That blood comes back to the right-hand side of the heart. And then as the heart beats, again, it sends that deoxygenated blood back to the lungs via these two little offshoots. So left-hand side of the heart deals with oxygenated blood. Left-hand side deals with oxygenated blood. Right-hand side deals with the blood that's deoxygenated, or the carbon dioxide. So let's look at blood specifically. So blood consists of plasma. So about 70% of blood is plasma. And then suspended within that, we've got three types of blood cells. So number one, we've got erythrocytes. Right, I'm going to spell that. ERYTHROCYTES, erythrocytes. These are known in normal language as red blood cells. And they are responsible for carrying nutrients. So nutrients, for example, your oxygen. Your oxygen is suspended within your red blood cells. The food that you eat, so the nutrients that come from the food that we eat, is absorbed into the blood circulation in the digestive system, so through the small intestines, through the wall of the small intestines. Our proteins, our carbohydrates, our sugars, our fats, etc., go into the blood circulation, and so the red blood cells will be responsible for picking up those nutrients and carrying them to where they need to go. Number two is leukocytes. LEUCOCYTES. Now, those of you who've done manicure, you learnt a condition called leukonachia, which was white specks on the nail. So then that makes, if we've got the leu in leukocytes, it refers to white blood cells. So leukocytes are known as white blood cells, and they are responsible for fighting infection. So when infection is found in the body, an alert will be sent for the white blood cells to visit the area where the infection is, or to sort of arm themselves to fight that infection. So our bodies will naturally produce a higher amount of white blood cells to fight that infection. That's why if you're not sure what's wrong with you, a blood test will test for the white blood cell count. And the higher that count is, it shows that there is infection present. So it's easy if you've got an ear infection, because generally you're going to have pain. But if you've got an infection inside your body that's perhaps causing symptoms but not specific pain to an area, your white blood cell count will show that the body's trying to fight something. And then they'll find what that is. And lastly, our last blood cell is called thrombocytes. THROMBOCYTES, thrombocytes. And these are known as platelets. and they are responsible for clotting. So we fall over and graze our knee. The area will bleed for a certain amount of time, and then we're just quite used to it miraculously stopping bleeding after a period of time. It's not miraculous. The thrombocytes have been initiated and off they go. So they flood to the area and they start to knit a sort of protective layer. So your thrombocytes is what's responsible for scabs. So forming a scab at the site of an injury. Another thing that will kick into action when you fall over is your white blood cell count as well. So naturally your white blood cells will increase to go to the area to help to fight any infection that could be present as well. And then your red blood cells will also rush to the area because then the area needs to heal. And so it needs the oxygen, the nutrients, the proteins that the blood cells carry in order to heal and reproduce the skin cells. So it's very clever. So 3 types of blood cells: erythrocytes, leukocytes and thrombocytes. Red blood cells, white blood cells and platelets, carrying nutrients, fighting infection and clotting. So on to your next paragraph. So blood vessels include, so we've got 2 main types of blood vessels and they branch off to make smaller vessels. So we've got thick-walled arteries. Arteries are thick-walled and they also have an elastic layer inside them. When we go on to this diagram, you're going to label that elastic layer. So it will be obvious, but if you want to make a note of it, you can. If you think arteries are going to be carrying blood under force. So arteries always come away from the heart. And so they are always carrying blood that has been pushed out. So they need to be thicker walled in order to allow that pressure really of the blood to rush through, but they also have that elastic layer so they're able to give a little bit as that blood does rush through. So thick walled arteries which carry blood under pressure away from the heart, and they subdivide into smaller arterioles. I'll spell that, A-R-T-E-R-I-O-L-E-S, arterioles, and finally capillaries. So your arteries are quite big, coming off from the heart. We couldn't have an artery all the way and down into the tiny, each layer of the skin. So think about it a little bit like a tree. So the trunk is your arteries, your branches are your arterioles, and then your twigs are your capillaries. It's just a network. And obviously we need bigger vessels to carry a majority of blood in places, and then we need tiny little vessels to get the blood to all the little intricate areas. And so then our second lot of blood vessels are thin-walled vessels, and they rely on movement for the blood flow to the heart. They start out as capillaries, becoming larger venules, V-E-N-U-L-E-S, and finally veins. So I want you to remember that arteries are always away, A-A-A. So arteries are always away from the heart, and veins come to the heart, always. There's no exceptions. Arteries away. Now, arteries don't have to work that hard because they've got a pump. Our heart pumps the blood, it contracts and shoots the blood out through the arteries. So it's under pressure, and so it can get to the tips of our toes, to the tips of our fingers, up to our heads really easily because it's got a pump there. Our veins don't have the same. So as our veins bring the blood back to the heart, there doesn't have a pump because the blood's already been pumped out to those areas. So the veins rely on movement. So as I'm moving, as I'm talking, that contracting and relaxing of my muscles, those blood veins, those vessels are going to run through my muscles, and as I'm moving, they're contracting and relaxing, and that's almost rippling the blood back to the heart. Which is why when we go on an aeroplane, it's really important we don't just sit for hours. It's important we don't sit for hours anytime. Varicose veins, we've all heard or seen those. And that's where veins have lost the capability to bring the blood back again. There is a little helper that we have in our veins, and it's a little flap. And so as I move a bit, so let's say I walk over to get a biscuit, my leg muscles work, and so that venous blood, the blood in my veins, moves up. But then obviously when I stop, gravity is going to want to pull it back down again. So our veins are really clever in that they've got these little flaps. So as the blood moves up, rather than then it just dropping back down to my feet again, these little flaps open and close to almost filter the blood back up the body. Really clever. So your heart has a pump, your arteries have a pump, which is your heart, nice and easy to get that blood out. But getting the blood back through your veins is much more difficult, relies on movement, but remember these little flaps that help. So next sort of paragraph, although it's a sentence, the heartbeat is felt as a pulse. When an artery is pressed against a bone. So in the areas that we can feel our pulse, so in our neck, in our, on our wrist, what we're doing is we're pressing an artery against a bone and we're just feeling that pulse of blood rushing through the artery. Remember, it's an artery that we've got to feel it against because an artery has got the pulse, has got the rush of blood from the heart. The force of the blood against the artery wall is measured as blood pressure. So when we talk about blood pressure, we're not talking about heart rate, the speed at which the heart is beating. We're talking about the pressure or the force at which that blood is coming away from the heart. So if I had to, there isn't really a word that describes it. Force is probably the best word. But if I just made the noise, that's what we're measuring. As the heart contracts and all that blood rushes out through the arteries, imagine it as a, that's what we're measuring. It's the force at which that blood comes away from the heart. And when we're talking about blood pressure, we've got two numbers, a top number and a bottom number. The top number is the force at which that blood rushes out. So that's systolic. Should be around 120. So it's measuring the force of the blood rushing, of the force of the blood rushing through that artery. It's measuring the I know. Watching this back is going to be interesting. The bottom number, the diastolic number, is measuring the force at which that artery then relaxes. Now that's quite difficult to get your head around, the force at which something relaxes. But it's the bit of not noise in between it's then that bit in between. So how much force did the artery have as it relaxed, as it didn't have blood or pressure running through it? Now, the reason blood pressure goes up, if you think you have got a certain amount of blood that you pump away from your heart at any one time, I don't know how much that is, it'll be some litres. If you have got a nice open artery, nothing in its way at all, a good clear route for that blood to be pushed away. You've got that, let's say 3 litres, that's not the number, but let's just imagine 3 litres of fluid to get through those arteries, and they're all nice and open. That's going to give you, hopefully, normal pressure. But now let's imagine that there's something blocking that artery. So it could be this sort of third arteries that we hear about, excuse me, or it could be a clot of some sort. You have then got the same amount of blood that's going to pump away from the heart, but that same amount of blood has got to get through a pipe, your artery, that's got less space for that fluid to get through. So the pressure to get that same fluid through is going to increase. There's going to be more pressure, more trying to get all of that blood through. So that's going to make that pressure that is measured, that force, go higher. So blood pressure is measuring the force of the blood as it comes away from the heart. Your top number of your blood pressure, your systolic, is your pressure as the blood rushes through, the force at which it rushes through, and your diastolic, your bottom number, is the pressure at which the artery then relaxes, or the force at which it relaxes. Okay, we've already touched on this next part. So the flow of blood between the heart and the lungs is known as pulmonary. Pulmonary. So that movement of blood from the lungs to the heart and the heart to the lungs is a specific circulation known as pulmonary circulation. And then once that blood is at the heart and it pumps out, it's going to go to the rest of the body, to all the body systems. So the flow of blood between the heart and the cells of the body is known as systemic. So a couple of examples, particularly for manicure and pedicure people, but actually body massage, Indian head, it still covers. So blood vessels to the hand and arm. So a couple of examples include the ulnar and radial arteries and veins. Makes sense because we've got the ulnar and the radius bones. So ulnar and radial artery and vein. So the ulnar and radial artery brings the oxygenated blood to the hand and arm, and the ulnar and radial veins take the deoxygenated blood, or the blood that's got the carbon dioxide in it, away from the hand and arm. Blood vessels to the leg and feet include the tibial, sounds a bit like tibia, which is a bone in your leg, arteries and veins. So again, the tibial artery brings oxygenated blood to the leg and feet, and the tibial vein takes the deoxygenated blood away. So functions of the blood circulation. We've got 4 functions. First one is transport. Our blood is our transportation system within our body. So our oxygen, carbon dioxide, your nutrients are all transported within your blood circulation. Your hormones are also transported into your blood circulation. So your endocrine glands, your hormonal glands will secrete the hormone that's required for the change in the body to happen into the blood circulation. That hormone will circulate and find its target organ to initiate change. So that might be a response to stress, like adrenaline is a hormone that responds to stress. It could be for our adolescent development, so testosterone, estrogen and progesterone production will make changes to our body as we go through adolescence. So blood, major transportation system of the body. Number 2, and you will have heard this when we talked about the integumentary system, heat regulation. So do you remember how we said that the skin was partly responsible for regulating heat? And we talked about the erector pili muscle, making the hair stand on end and trapping a layer of warm air. And we also talked about the production of sweat, which helped to cool us down. But we also talked about two words which weren't particularly relevant, but sort of covered the subject of temperature regulation, and that was vasodilation and vasoconstriction. And we talked a little bit like about a boa constrictor, snake, closing off all your blood capillaries. And when we had vasodilation, all the blood capillaries were opening. So that's obviously to do with your blood circulatory system. So when we are hot, our blood capillaries will open, vasodilate, all the blood will rush to the surface of the body. That gives us our rosy cheeks when we're hot, but it also encourages us to sweat more, and obviously sweat cools the body down. So when we're hot, our blood capillaries vasodilate. And then when we're cold, they do the opposite, they vasoconstrict. So all the blood capillaries close off and they keep all the blood in the centre of the body, bathing our brain, our organs. Because like we spoke about, we can live without our fingers and our toes and our hands and our feet. And our body doesn't know we're just nipping to the post office. You know, we've gone outside, it's freezing cold, our body goes into survival. Blood rushes to the centre of the body, which is why we go a bit of a grey colour. We definitely don't have rosy cheeks, or we're not rosy in colour. We actually go a little bit pale and white, and that's because the blood's not there making us rosy. It's all in the centre of our body, keeping our organs alive. So first function, transportation or transport. Second, heat regulation. Number 3 is defence. So our leukocytes, our white blood cells, are responsible for fighting infection and defending our body. Speaks for itself, really. Don't need to go into any more detail other than you know the defence comes from your white blood cells. So white blood cells will find areas of infection and they will try to engulf the infected cells or the virus cells, as that's sort of what we're talking about mostly at the moment, and try to break them down using various different methods, which can get a little bit confusing. The way that the viruses often attack our cells is by penetrating into our normal body cells, and they take over our mitochondria. So if you think back to that first lesson where we talked about cells, the mitochondria were the powerhouses where the cell generated energy from. And so virus cells attack our cells and they get in and they take over the working of the mitochondria so that they can almost use our cells as a portal to then produce more of their own virus cells. I watched a really good YouTube video when this coronavirus was first around. If I can find it, I'll try to put it in the link, but it really explained it well. And I didn't really know how viruses affected us, but yeah, they sort of invade our cells and start taking over the working of our mitochondria, which is bizarre. But our body is so clever at how it sort of reverses that. And lastly, number 4, a function of our blood circulation is clotting. So through our thrombocytes, clotting is a big lifesaver. Obviously not when we fall over and graze our knee. We're pretty much not going to die from bleeding or blood loss with that. But if you think about more severe injuries that we could have, internal bleeding or external bleeding, if we were to cut an artery, our thrombocytes are responsible for clotting any of that bleeding. Clearly, if the bleeding is severe, the thrombocytes can only do so much, but it's a huge part of our survival is our ability to clot blood. So then let's link some of that information to the treatments that you'll be providing. So the effects of massage on blood circulation. So number one, we're going to increase the blood supply to the skin, the muscles, well, everything really, bones, organs. So we're increasing the blood supply to the area that we're working on. That's going to make that area, the bones, the muscles, the organs associated with that area just much more healthy. We're bringing oxygenated blood to that area. We're helping to get rid of waste products from the area. So increasing blood circulation to an area is only positive. Number two, it's going to be nourishing to the cells. So again, similar reason really as to number one, but as we increase that blood circulation, we're going to increase the oxygen and the nutrients that is delivered to all of the cells of the body. And number three, we're going to improve cell renewal or cell reproduction. If you remember, we have a name for that simple cell division, which is mitosis. So you could say that it improves cell renewal or cell reproduction, or you could say that it improves mitosis. I wouldn't say that to your clients. They're going to not have a clue what you're talking about. You know that it's called mitosis, and you could mention mitosis, but then explain what that is. But if a client comes to you and says, you know, what are the benefits of me having a massage? These are the things that you want to talk about in regard to blood circulation. Okay, so that sheet is now filled out, and we will just talk a little bit more about those subjects as we look at the diagrams. So if you have a look firstly at your artery and vein diagram. So you can see above, it is labelled artery and vein. Now, arteries and veins are very similar in their main structure. The only difference is that your artery has the elastic layer, the layer that's going to give a little bit under pressure. Remember, arteries are always away from the heart, so the blood coming through the arteries will always be under pressure. And your vein has got a valve. Do you remember I talked about those little valves that flop over to make sure that all the blood doesn't just get pulled down to your feet through gravity? So as we move, the blood rushes up through the veins and the valve flops over to keep that blood up higher, and that continues to happen. So your label A, which is your very top label, is your outer layer. Layer B is your muscle layer. Layer C is only on the artery, so that is your elastic layer. The area pointing to D is only on the vein, and you can see that that's a valve. It's not a layer of the artery or vein, so that is your valve. D is valve. And E is pointed to on both of your diagrams, and that's the inner layer. So on both your arteries and your veins, you have an inner layer, a muscle layer, and an outer layer. That's the same on both. Your artery has the elastic layer to allow a little bit of stretch, and your vein has the valve that stops backflow of deoxygenated blood. Now that muscle layer goes back to our, do you remember we've talked about types of muscular tissue, and we talked about visceral muscular tissue, which is not under conscious control, and it talked about like the movement of food through our digestive system. This muscle layer in your artery and your vein is also visceral muscular tissue. So it will move not under conscious control, but it will help to move things through your circulatory system. So it's another example of a visceral type of muscular tissue. Okay, that's the artery and the vein diagram. Okay, if we just look at our little people, we're going to label some major arteries and veins in the body. Now, if you ever see this diagram again, just remember to look for the little headings underneath each of our little friends, because one has arterial and one has venous. That helps you straight away. So you know that the venous one are going to be veins and the arterial is going to be arteries. So A is a major artery in the body, comes up into the neck. It's the carotid. So A is pointing to an artery on your artery man, and that's your carotid, C-A-R-O-T-I-D, carotid artery. B is an artery that comes down the arm. Now, those of you who've already done some A&P with me will know that under the arm we have a lymph node. We'll talk about these next week, but the lymph node is called the axillary lymph node. This artery is called the axillary artery. A-X-I-L-L-A-R-Y, axillary artery. C is pointing to an artery that branches to a main organ of the body. That organ are the kidneys, so you can see there's two branching off to two kidneys. And C is the renal artery. So supplying the kidneys with oxygenated blood from the heart. And finally, D is a major artery that branches down each leg. If we think about that bone that's in the upper thigh, it's called the femur, and this is the femoral artery, F-E-M-O-R-A-L, femoral artery, feeding the leg with oxygenated blood. Okay, coming to our second person. So this is venous diagram. So this is showing veins. So E is our popliteal vein. P-O-P-L-I-T-E-A-L, popliteal vein. So this is one of the veins that will be responsible for bringing carbon dioxide away from the cells of the leg back up to the heart. We've also got another lymph node that sits behind the knee. So again, those of you who've done some A&P with me before, that's called the popliteal lymph node. So you start to see things matching. They sound like weird and wonderful names, but then they start to repeat themselves. F is in the arm again. So whereas the axillary artery brought the arm oxygenated blood, we have now got our brachial or brachial vein bringing the deoxygenated blood back. So the spelling for F is B-R-A-C-H-I-A-L, brachial vein. And lastly, G is a vein in the neck, and it's our jugular. J-U-G-U-L-A-R, jugular vein. So that will be bringing deoxygenated blood away from the head back down to the heart. Remember, arteries away from the heart, veins towards. Okay, if you have a look at your specific head diagram, this is looking specifically at our carotid artery. So we've already labelled our carotid artery on our last diagram, which was A. But our carotid artery branches off. So A is the internal carotid artery. B is the external carotid artery. And C is the common carotid artery. Internal, external, and common. I don't particularly, as a massage therapist, think that this is the most crucial bit of information that you need to learn, but some of you will see this diagram again, so just learn it. Okay, and lastly, you've got your labels for this heart diagram, so you can label them yourself. Where the word has superior or inferior VC, the VC stands for vena cava. V-E-N-A-C-A-V-A, vena cava. So rather than particularly worry about the labels, what I want to do is to talk about this whole process that we've just been talking about and how that relates to the heart. So I'm just going to bring the diagram a little bit closer so I can see what I'm pointing to. So when we breathe in, nice deep breath, our lungs are filled with lots of gases, but let's just focus on the oxygen because that's the one we want. So our lungs breathe in the oxygen and then that gets transferred into the blood in the lungs. So there's blood in the lungs and that gas gets pushed into the blood. That blood then comes from the lungs to the heart via these vessels here, which aren't labelled actually. These are the pulmonary veins. So this blood has got oxygen in it. We've just breathed it in. It's now transported from the lungs to the left side of the heart. Remember, the left side deals with oxygen. So we have got red blood, oxygenated blood that's come into the left-hand side of the heart via the pulmonary veins. So this is in my body. It's not as you look at it, it's in your body. And this might have flipped me round, so don't worry too much about, so into here. So that blood is going to come into, we've got 4 chambers of our heart. It's going to come into the left atrium. So oxygenated blood comes in via the pulmonary vein. Remember, veins come towards the heart into the left atrium. That blood then filters down into the lower section of the left-hand side of the heart, and it comes through a valve called the bicuspid. That's labelled. Tricuspid. Hang on a sec. Yeah, when I turn it round, sorry. Tricuspid, sorry. Oh gosh. Wait. I think I've been looking at this the wrong direction. I'm just going to pause my recording just for a second. Okay, so our oxygenated blood comes from our lungs through our pulmonary veins into the left-hand top chamber here, the left atrium. and then it filters through the bicuspid valve into the lower section on the left-hand side of the heart, called the left ventricle. The heart then pumps. So imagine that this collapses in on itself, it contracts. And all that blood that's sitting in this lower region here comes up this weird artery here, the aorta, and then it's off to the rest of the body, feeding the body with oxygenated blood. So oxygenated blood comes from the lungs into the left atrium, filters down through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. The heart contracts and sends that blood off through the aorta and off out to all the arteries, feeding the body with oxygenated blood. So the blood all goes off, our cells say thank you very much, that's lovely, we really like that oxygen, here's our gift back to you, and here is our carbon dioxide. So waste product of oxygen production is carbon dioxide, and we need to get that out of the body, and we know we breathe that out. So the veins then take hold, so capillaries into venules, into veins, and remember it relies on our movement to get that blood back up to the heart, because we can't rely on our pump. And then the blood is going to enter the right atrium via the superior and inferior vena cava. So these are veins, and the deoxygenated blood comes into the right atrium. That deoxygenated blood filters through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. And then when the heart beats, and when it's sending that oxygenated blood off to the body, it sends the deoxygenated blood up the pulmonary artery and off, as you can see, to each lung. So each time the heart contracts, the left side is sending oxygenated blood off to the body, and it's sending the deoxygenated blood off to the lungs. And every time the heart relaxes, it's drawing oxygenated blood in from the lungs and drawing deoxygenated blood in from the body. Now, that is super confusing, which is why I had to double check myself, because you can easily start to get on the wrong path with describing it. Be aware of it. Be aware that the heart is the centre of pumping the blood to and from the lungs and to and from the body. That's your main piece of information. Know that your arteries always come away from the heart and your veins always come towards the heart. And know that we're feeding oxygenated blood to the cells and bringing carbon dioxide blood away from the cells. And obviously that's linked to our lungs.